Friends, Dave Paulides, NABS Missing Project. This is Huck. She's the executive producer of the show. We just got back from a long hike. She is pooped. She's had fun. Right? Was that fun, huh? Yeah. You're a good girl. Yeah, you're a good girl. You're a good girl, yeah. Yeah, you're a good girl. Oh, you're a good girl. We had fun. Yeah. And I would be neglectful if I didn't say that this is Huck TV. It's her channel. She says, Dad, make sure you tell them. And I will. Alrighty then. Now, we're going to get on to the show. I got some things for you. Some interesting things. I never get paid for endorsing anything, just so you know. But this is the first video I've made since I'm back from Phenomicon. And that was phenomenal. It's always one of the best conferences of the year. And great people. Absolutely great people. When I was there, I ran into an old friend who was in Missing 411, the UFO Connection. My friend is named Richard Beckwith, city attorney, Rock Springs, Wyoming. He wrote a book, this book, Need to Know. Now, Richard is a super smart guy. And this book deals with espionage in history, the Defense Secrets, Espionage Act, Atomic Energy Act, the invention of the Secrecy Act, Freedom of Information Act, classified information. So I got home, I couldn't put it down. Outstanding book. Need to Know, R.W. Beckwith. Richard Beckwith. I encourage you to get it. And besides all that, he's just a super nice guy. And he did a great job in the movie. Richard, you're appreciated greatly. Now, one of the things, I don't do it in every conference, but in this one I did. I didn't think I was going to have anyone with me to help me, and I wanted to keep my mind busy, so I agreed to do a hosted dinner. And they set it up, and there's about 12, 14 people there. Absolutely the nicest people you could ever imagine. Bar none. Super nice. And I usually start these dinners off with having everyone introduce themselves, where they're from, what's their interest in the conference. And then we, of course, open it up for questions and statements and opinions. And it's just a very cool round table of friends talking. And that's really what it is. Now, I arrived at this table, and sitting in the middle of the table, it's a long, thin table, sitting in the middle of it is this gift bag. At the end of the dinner, I said, is this somebody's? And they said, what was here when we got here? I think it's yours, Dave. So I looked in, and the card said Dave, so I didn't open it there because nobody claimed it was theirs or was giving it to me there. So I got back to my room and I opened it, and it says, it's just so like you to reach out to the others, to do things, even small things, that help in a big way, to care like no one else, and to take the time to show it. To David, you have deep down goodness that comes through in your actions. Saying thank you just doesn't seem to cover it. You're a blessing to me. I'm totally grateful for you from all of us. I thought, maybe it's from the conference? I don't know. So I'm in my room, and I opened it, and it's a book. Kind of a hardback book that's sealed like it is right here. Now, I've read this before, what it says in here. And I swear to you something just true. A long time ago, I first read this saying, and I've thought the same thing many times in my life. called Footprints in the Sand. One night a man had a dream. He dreamed he was walking along the beach with the Lord, and across the sky flashed scenes of his life. In each scene, he noticed two sets of footprints in the sand. One belonged to him, and the other belonged to the Lord. When the last scene of his life flashed before him, he looked back at the footprints in the sand and noticed that many times along the path in his life, there was only one set of footprints. He had also noticed that it happened at the very lowest and saddest times in his life. That really bothered him, and he questioned the Lord about it. Lord, you said that once I decided to follow you, you would walk with me all the way. But I've noticed that during the most troublesome times in my life, there's only one set of footprints. I don't understand why in the times when I needed you the most, you should leave me. The Lord replied, my precious, precious child, I love you and I would never, never leave you. During your times of trial and suffering, when you saw only one set of footprints, it was then that I carried you. I don't think I'm different than most. I think that there's times in our lives where we hit the basement. I've hit the basement more in the last 4 years than I ever have in the remainder of my life. Death of my son. Death of Scott Carpenter. Death of Alan Adadero. Horrible times for me. Horrible. And at those bottom times, I gotta tell you, it's pretty bothersome. Pretty bothersome. And when I was reading that alone in my room, I thought, wow, what a kind soul, whoever sent this to me. The next day at the conference, there were some really long lines to meet me and get a book at the conference. It was amazing. I'm very humbled. But a lady came up and quietly said, "Hey Dave, I'm the one who gave you the statement in the bag." Wow. I said, "Man, that was very thoughtful of you. I can't even tell you how much I appreciated that and how timely of a statement that was." During that weekend, I had a really good friend help me out. Marty runs the Bigfoot cruises that were going on in November, the Bigfoot Caribbean cruise, gather up events. Gather up is one word, gather up events. He's one of the owners with his wife. And he said, "Dave, I'm going to come there and help you. I know you're there alone. I'll bring Nikki, my wife, with me and we'll help you out. And there might be some other friends with us." I said, "Wow, thank you." And he showed up. And he brought another couple that I'd never met before. Outstanding people. Outstanding people. All four of them did outrageously great work with lines that were unreal sometimes. Well, one of this couple's, the lady of the couple was a counselor, grief counselor. She's a general counselor. She was busy all the time. A couple of times, and it doesn't happen very often, but a couple of times at the conference, people would come up and say something about Ben. And if you just hit me at the wrong time, it's not your fault. Just like a wave of emotion hits me in the side of the face. This happened a couple times. And I had to just turn away from everyone, take a couple deep breaths. But I felt like going to her a couple times and asking for a 10-minute counseling session. But I never did. And maybe that means I'm healing. I don't know. Because I didn't want to bring the group that was helping me down or have my feelings supersede what was happening amongst everyone. We were getting along great. So I just let it go by. I hope that means I'm healing. I don't know. A couple of times I just had to leave the booth for 5 or 10 minutes, wash my face, regroup, come back and look like Happy Days. But Marty, Nikki, and this other couple were they saved me no end. And if the people that came by my booth didn't know them, that's who they were. Can't say enough about them, really. Okay, on to the show, as they say. This is another Dinkey Creek episode. Now, just so you know, after we started this series, a fire broke out right at Dinkey Creek. It's called the Garnet Fire. And it's a big one. Really big. I think it's at 13,000 acres now. Sad because that area is beautiful, but let's get on to the show. This is a story I've written about before in my books. The man's name was Doug Pearce, P-E-A-R-S-E, 86 years old, missing April 21st, 2005. 86 years old, but hold your taters, don't make a judgment about him. He went missing near Fish Camp, Mariposa County, in the Dinkey Creek cluster. He lived alone, lived on Ben-Hur Drive in Mariposa. And he was a retired nuclear and chemical engineer. This is Doug. Now, I had a roommate at Berkeley for 1 year that was studying chemical engineering. And let me tell you something. I had more people come by my room and say, do you know your roommate has to be brilliant to get through Berkeley and a chemical engineer? I said, yeah, I've heard that so many times. You got to be really smart. But Doug had 2 sons. One of them died in '94, and he had 6 grandkids. In years past, he lived in Thingsville, Wisconsin, Stockton, and Oakland, California. He was a World War II vet. And everybody in Mariposa, the greater area, they knew him. And they lovingly called him Grandpa Doug by locals. One thing about Doug, different than most 86-year-old men, he was sharp as a tack. He volunteered every day at either Mariposa Middle School or Woodland Elementary. He flip-flopped those days. And he assisted with special education kids. 50 to 60 hours a week. He was born and raised in Michigan. Teachers, administrators said Doug worked like a dog, not like a 86-year-old man. He worked like a 40-year-old. And not one person ever said he skipped a beat. Now, on April 21st, 2005, Doug didn't show up to volunteer at Mariposa Middle School. And he never missed a day. So the school called for a sheriff to do a welfare check at his home. Deputies went by, And his 1990 Ford Ranger pickup was not there. He was not home. And they immediately entered the truck into the National Computer Information Center database as associated with a missing person. And luckily, that later day, the truck was found near Fish Camp. Here's Dinkey Creek, the Garnet fire I was telling you about. Fish Camp. Fish Camp is just on the outer perimeter of Yosemite National Park. Well, this find was troublesome to deputies because what they did is they found the truck stuck in the mud and a good portion of the truck was burned up. Well, they immediately called for arson investigators. They came up. They determined that the fire was accidentally caused somewhere in the truck, but Doug wasn't there. On-scene deputy searched the truck as much as he could, didn't find anything unusual, called for a supervisor, and the supervisor authorized a search and rescue call-up for Doug. Everybody knew who he was. They talked to the school, and the school advised that Doug showed zero indication of any medical condition at all. Nobody knew he was taking any pharmaceuticals or drugs. And they said that he was as sharp as any teacher on site. So it wasn't dementia or Alzheimer's that made him walk away. And they also said that he knew that area where his truck was found, like you know your own neighborhood. But that even bothered people more. Doug was identified as being 5'10", about 150 pounds. He always wore that 10-gallon hat I showed you. Mariposa County requested planes, military helicopters, canine units, ground pounders, and equestrians, and made a mutual aid call out to other jurisdictions in the area. Deputy Jeff Totten gave an interview and stated that 12 agencies were assisting in a 10-day search and rescue. Agencies came as far as Mono, Contra Costa, and Marin counties. And after 9 days, the deputy said they didn't find a single thing. No tracks, no scent trail, no nothing. And this is off the side of a dirt road. SAR commanders, which I looked up their reports from the different agencies, said Mariposa County ran a complex, incomplete 10-day search and rescue for Doug. To tell you what kind of man Doug was, there was a newspaper article that stated the following, that they had a middle school graduation in 2004, and parents of the kids gave Doug a standing ovation during the ceremony for his outstanding volunteer efforts. Doug wasn't paid, yet 50 to 60 hours of his life was committed to the kids, special education kids. Friends, this is huge. For somebody to dedicate that much of their life to the community, the kids that need it the most, coming from a man that was brilliant, that's a good deed. That's being a good person. Weather issues during the search inhibited the searchers 2 of those days. Doug disappeared right outside the perimeter of Yosemite National Park. And I don't think I need to emphasize this much, but Doug had special DNA and genes. 86 years old, moved around fluidly, not like a disabled man. His brain was still sharp as you can imagine. He was in the giving mode. Obviously an intellect, a retired chemical and nuclear engineer. They bring dogs in, they can't find a scent trail or tracks. It occurred in a cluster zone, missing in an area of many other cases, and Doug's never found. Never returns to his house, never comes back to the community. Yes, I say that a lot of these cases are troublesome, but a man lives 86 years of his life. And in the last few years, instead of trying to make more for himself, he gives it back to the community in droves. And we can't find him. What in the heck is going on? I know some of you say, oh, Dave, you always say it's always the best people, always the nicest people. Why do you always say that? Because it's true. I'm not exaggerating on Doug. That is what the community said about him. I want you to understand something. There is something going on here. If you're new to this and you don't understand, I get it. But there's something much more confusing going on than just your standard missing person on most of these cases. Next case involves a very young man, young boy, named Alan Visher, V-I-S-H-E-R. This is Alan, 12 years old, missing July 18th, 1962, 35 miles southeast of Dinkey Creek. He lived in Berkeley with his parents, sister, and 2 brothers. His father was a super prominent psychiatrist for UC San Francisco, the Langley Porter Medical Center. His name was Dr. John Visher. His uncle was no slouch. He was a professor of geology at Indiana University. Alan came from a generation of brilliant minds. Just the facts. So, the Garnett Fire we talked about, Dinkey Creek, Shaver Lake we've talked about many times before, and here's Simpson Meadow where he disappeared, Kings Canyon National Park. This is all within close distance. Now, I don't have many cases in Kings Canyon National Park. Very few. But when you look at that map I just showed you, it's like a half of an umbrella. Sequoia, Kings Canyon, Yosemite. Dinkey Creek, right in the middle. Yeah. Well, Mrs. Visher decided to take her kids on a trip to Kings Canyon National Park, sponsored by the Sierra Club of California. And they were going to take 50 adults and children on a hike together. Great idea. Now, the Sierra Club has a love-hate relationship in California. They're about preservation, but at the cost of what? There's a lot of questions about some things that they did, especially along the California coastline, with private property and the such. But aside from that, the Vishers lived in Berkeley. His dad was a top of the world psychiatrist. He didn't go on the trip, he had to work. So the wife took the kids. July 18th, the Allens' mom lost track of Alan in the Dog Creek area near the middle fork of the Kings River as they were approaching Simpson Meadow at an elevation of about 6,000 feet. Once Mrs. Visher understood she couldn't find Alan, she got a hold of the group leader and everyone stopped. and they started searching. 2 members were sent ahead to get National Park Service searchers. So let me tell you something. They're in the middle of nowhere, hiking. To have 50 people with you that can immediately start searching for someone, that is huge. I don't know I've ever read about that happening before. Well, part of the Sierra Club also has search and rescue members. So when those 2 people finally got back to the national park local rangers and said, hey, we need help in here right now, somebody's missing, those people also called into the San Francisco Bay Area and said, hey, we need Sierra Club searchers in here right now. And the motions got going. Rangers arrived and organized the 50 people that were on site. And like I said, a very, very rare commodity in the middle of nowhere. National Park Service called for the Western Air Rescue Team out of Hamilton Air Force Base. They also asked for helicopters and canines. Helicopters were sent from Steed Air Force Base in Reno, and the Sierra Club had people responding, flying from Moffett Naval Air Station in Sunnyvale, California. Sunnyvale, right next to Cupertino, where I grew up. And in fact, Lockheed at the time was located right on Moffett Naval Air Station property. And we had people in our community working as engineers at Lockheed all the time. So right from the get-go, the 50 people are looking for Alan. They're not having any luck. And it doesn't make any sense because this area that he disappeared in is all granite, all over. The National Park Service did a smart thing. They requested rangers from Sequoia and Yosemite National Parks. Because these parks are so close together, they trade resources when there's an emergency. No, it's an emergency. And so they sent more rangers. And they got an additional 50. So they have a total of 100 people on site. The reports indicated that every day the search zone got bigger and bigger and bigger because they were finding nothing. Now, Alan was carrying a backpack filled with supplies. They weren't finding it. They weren't finding his coat. They weren't finding shoes, nothing. Because of the lack of crews, the rangers started to interview everyone in the group who had seen anything, seen nothing, had nothing to say. Everyone was talked to. I think that's smart. I think that needed to be done. But the weird thing is, nobody saw anything. July 23rd, he disappeared on the 18th. So about 5 days after he disappeared, there's an article, and in it, the chief ranger, Peter Schuft, from Kings Canyon and Sequoia National Park, made a statement. Listen to this carefully. It doesn't look good. The place that the boy was last seen is in an area that would be difficult to get lost. This could mean that some harm had befallen the boy. It's kind of weird. Too generic. What does he mean that some harm may have befallen the boy? He didn't explain himself. And there was no follow-up questions by the news. The reason Schuft made the statement, I think, is that because the entire area is solid granite, very little ground cover, no places to hide. Helicopters, planes had repeatedly flown over that area and seemed squat. which didn't make any sense. And of course, as in every case of a missing person, if you're within 100 miles of any water, it seems like, the National Park Service says, well, it's possible he fell into the river or the creek. The issue is his backpack and sleeping bag would float, and that was never found. This incident happened in Kings Canyon National Park, 35 miles from Dinkey Creek, in a cluster of missing people. I can only imagine what Mrs. Visher is thinking. Horrible. So let's go through this. There's granite everywhere out there. He disappeared adjacent to creeks and rivers. Canines couldn't find a scent. There were no tracks, no scent trail going to the rivers or the creeks. You won't find this case on any National Park Service database of missing. Every once in a while, the National Park Service will put out a flyer that says, oh, this person's missing. But once they're determined to be deceased, they're no longer a missing person. That's the way they keep their rolls completely clean. They just keep wiping them away. That's why they ask people, oh, you may want to get a death certificate on that. Yeah, they want the death certificate so they can take it off their rolls. Alan came from a long line of intellects. 50 plus people were around the Visher family during this time, and nobody saw anything. The search and rescue coordinator said that 720 square miles were searched by 150 searchers, planes, helicopters, and ground pounders. It's a big effort, folks. Big effort. I always look forward in the archives trying to find information, because you never know, 10, 15, 20 years later, they might find remains, etc. They didn't. But there was an article in 2009. Now, this happened in 1962. 2009, 47 years later. Dr. John Fisher died at 88 years old without ever knowing what happened to his son. That's what the article said. I think that's the worst kind of punishment we can have as parents. The oddity that nobody saw anything. The oddity that there's 50 people right there that can jump on the search and they didn't find him. It's absolutely bizarre to me. And then again, the disappearance of Doug Pearce. Fairly close to his home, in an area he knew really well. Truck gets stuck in the mud and burns up. I find that pretty weird, folks. I'm just saying. I think that's very odd. But this whole Dinkey Creek area is very odd. I think it's very odd that at about the time we start talking about Dinkey Creek, it starts burning. Coincidence. You are important. You are greatly important. And you are appreciated. Thank you for being here. If you do like this idea of me clustering up cases like physicists, special locations like Dinkey Creek, let me know. If you can't stand it, let me know. But I've never done this before except for these two. I may do it in the future. Who knows? But your opinion's important. Feel free to voice it. Don't be rude, crude, uncouth. Otherwise, you'll be gone. And in the meantime, kindness. I can't tell you how many times at Phenomicon people came by the table and said, Dave, I take what you mean seriously. Kindness is important. And I really wish more people would be kind. Time after time after time, people came up and talked to me about it. So I know it's important. The other thing I heard, not one person came up and said, Dave, get rid of those letters. At least 30 people came up and said, Dave, bring the letters back. Yeah. So, again, kindness. I think about it every day. Just like I think about Ben. Paulides out.